Margaret Whitmore's arthritic fingers trembled as she placed the 12th dinner plate on the mahogany table, the china clinking against the silence that had filled her Detroit home for 47 Christmas Eves. The fork slipped from her grasp, clattering to the hardwood floor. This wasn't another lonely holiday dinner for one. 7 strangers stood shivering on her front porch, their desperate faces pressed against the frosted glass as the blizzard howled behind them. The youngest, a pregnant woman barely breathing through labor pains, collapsed against the doorframe while an 8-year-old girl with blue lips whispered, "Please, we're freezing." The elderly woman beside them clutched a diabetic emergency kit with shaking hands, her eyes rolling back. Margaret stared at their faces, faces that looked hauntingly familiar, like ghosts from a past she'd buried decades ago. "Let us in," the pregnant woman gasped. "Harold sent us." Margaret's dead husband's name hit her like ice water. And how could strangers know Harold? And why tonight, when she'd finally accepted dying alone? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Margaret Whitmore had learned to measure her days in silence. At 72, she moved through her Victorian home like a ghost haunting her own life, each footstep echoing against walls that once rang with children's laughter and Harold's terrible jokes. The house on Maple Street had been their sanctuary for 45 years, where they'd raised their dreams and buried their sorrows beneath layers of Christmas memories that now felt like beautiful lies. She'd been Margaret Sullivan then, a young teacher with fire in her belly and love in her heart. Harold Whitmore had courted her with Sunday drives and strawberry ice cream, promising her a house full of children and holidays that would make Norman Rockwell weep. For 27 years, that promise held true. Amanda's first steps on Christmas morning, birthday parties that spilled into the backyard, Easter egg hunts that turned into neighborhood legends. Then came the pregnancy that changed everything. Amanda, 19 and radiant, standing in this very kitchen with tears streaming down her face, whispering words that shattered Margaret's carefully constructed world. "I'm having a baby, Mama. Not married, no ring, no husband, just shame that Margaret couldn't bear to face." "Get out," she'd said, her voice cold as the Detroit winter pressing against the windows. "Get out, and don't come back until you can face this family with dignity." Amanda had left that snowy February morning, taking with her every laugh, every song, every reason Margaret had for setting the table for more than one. Harold had begged, pleaded, driven the frozen streets looking for their daughter. But Margaret's pride was a fortress built of righteousness and fear, and she'd defended it until it became her prison. Harold died 5 winters ago, his heart giving out while shoveling the same driveway where Amanda had once built snowmen. Margaret found him there, peaceful in the snow, and realized she was now completely alone. The neighbors still waved from their windows, but they belonged to a world where families gathered, where phones rang with voices saying, "I love you," where Christmas meant more than microwave dinners and reruns of old movies. The house was bleeding money now. Social Security barely covered the mortgage Harold had somehow managed to keep refinancing. The heating bills arrived like death sentences each month. Prescription bottles lined the kitchen counter like tiny monuments to her failing body, and sometimes, more often than she'd ever admit, Margaret forgot to take them. Forgot what day it was, forgot why she was standing in the middle of a room with tears on her cheeks. Dr. Peterson's words echoed in her mind. "Early-stage Alzheimer's, Margaret. We can slow it down, but you'll need support. Family. Family." The word tasted like bitter medicine. She had no family. She'd driven away the only family she'd ever had, and now she was paying the price in solitude that felt like suffocation. Tonight was Christmas Eve, and Margaret had set the table for 12 out of muscle memory and stubborn hope, knowing she'd eat her canned soup alone while the snow fell like funeral flowers outside her window. The storm had been building all day, turning the Detroit sky the color of old pewter and sending neighbors scurrying indoors with armloads of groceries and worried glances at the weather reports. Margaret had watched from her kitchen window as the Hendersons next door battened down their shutters and the young couple across the street wrestled a Christmas tree through their front door, laughing as snow stuck to their winter coats. She'd turned away from their joy, unable to bear another reminder of what Christmas used to mean. By 6 o'clock, the wind was howling like a living thing, rattling the Victorians' old bones and sending ice crystals against the windows in rhythmic patterns that sounded almost like Morse code. Margaret had just finished her ritual of setting the dining room table, 12 place settings arranged with the precision of a woman who'd done this every Christmas Eve for 47 years, when the first knock came. It was soft, almost apologetic, barely audible above the storm's fury. Margaret paused with her hand on the last dinner napkin, thinking she'd imagined it. But then it came again, more insistent this time, accompanied by a woman's voice calling through the wind, "Please, is anyone home? We need help." Margaret's first instinct was to pretend she hadn't heard. Detroit had taught her to be cautious, especially after dark, especially during storms when desperate people did desperate things. But something in the voice, a note of genuine terror mixed with exhaustion, made her set down the napkin and move toward the front door. Through the frosted glass panels, she could make out shapes huddled on her covered porch. 7 figures pressed together against the cold, their forms barely visible through the swirling snow. The pregnant woman was in the center, her hands pressed against her swollen belly, her face contorted with what looked like pain. Beside her stood a middle-aged Asian man with his arm around a small girl whose lips were clearly blue even through the glass. "Ma'am, please," the pregnant woman called again, her voice cracking. "I'm Elena Rodriguez. I'm a nurse at Detroit General, and we're stranded. Our cars broke down about a mile from here, and this little girl needs warmth. She's hypothermic." Margaret's hand hovered over the deadbolt. 47 years of teaching had honed her ability to read people, and something about this group felt different from the usual con artists and thieves who sometimes targeted elderly residents during storms. The pregnant woman's scrubs were visible beneath her inadequate winter coat. The man holding the child had the careful posture of someone accustomed to protecting others. An elderly black woman leaned heavily on a younger man in military fatigues, both of them swaying with exhaustion. But it was the teenage girl at the edge of the group who made Margaret's breath catch in her throat. Even through the distorted glass, even with snow in her dark hair and tears frozen on her cheeks, the girl looked exactly like Amanda had at that age. The same stubborn chin, the same wide eyes, the same way of standing with her shoulders squared against the world. "Harold sent us!" Elena called out, and Margaret's world tilted on its axis. The deadbolt turned before Margaret's conscious mind had made the decision. The door swung open, and the winter storm burst into her warm hallway, along with 7 strangers whose presence felt both random and inevitable, like the answer to a prayer she'd been too proud to say out loud. Elena stumbled through the doorway first, one hand pressed to her lower back, her face pale with more than cold. "Thank you," she gasped. "Thank you so much." "I'm sorry to impose, but—" She doubled over suddenly, gripping the doorframe as a contraction seized her. The man with the little girl pushed past Margaret without ceremony, his eyes scanning the house with military efficiency. "She needs warmth immediately," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to crisis. "David Chen, this is my daughter Grace. Her lips are blue. We need to get her core temperature up." The teenage girl was the last to enter, moving with the careful steps of someone who'd learned not to take shelter for granted. She looked up at Margaret with eyes so familiar, it was like looking into a mirror that reflected the past, and whispered, "I'm Sarah. Sarah Thompson. I think you might be my grandmother." Margaret's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the door for support, staring at this girl who couldn't possibly be real, couldn't possibly be standing in her hallway, speaking words that rewrote everything Margaret thought she knew about her life. The storm raged behind them, but inside her house, time seemed to have stopped, frozen in a moment that would divide her life into before and after. Margaret stood frozen in her doorway, watching 7 strangers transform her orderly home into organized chaos. The military man, David, he'd said, had already carried the little girl to her living room sofa, barking instructions about blankets and hot tea with the efficiency of someone who'd handled medical emergencies before. Elena, the pregnant nurse, was directing traffic despite her obvious labor pains, telling an elderly black woman where to find towels, while a younger man in fatigues secured the front door against the howling wind. But Margaret couldn't stop staring at Sarah Thompson, this teenager who claimed to be her granddaughter, who had Amanda's stubborn chin and Harold's gentle eyes, and was looking at Margaret like she held the answers to every question Sarah had ever asked. "Your grandmother?" Margaret's voice came out as a whisper. "Child, I don't have any grandchildren. My daughter." She paused, the familiar shame rising in her throat like bile. "My daughter Amanda and I haven't spoken in 20 years. Sarah's face crumpled, but she lifted her chin in a gesture so achingly familiar that Margaret had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. "Amanda Thompson is my mother. She told me my grandmother was dead, but 3 weeks ago when she got really sick, she kept saying your name, Margaret Whitmore on Maple Street. She made me promise to find you if anything happened to her." The world tilted sideways. Margaret felt her carefully constructed reality fracturing like ice under pressure. Amanda was sick. Amanda had kept Margaret's name, had spoken of her in delirium, had sent this beautiful broken child to her door. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt," Elena called from the sofa, her voice tight with pain. "But we need to focus on Grace right now. Her core temperature is dangerously low, and I think I'm in active labor." The old teacher in Margaret took over, pushing aside the emotional earthquake Sarah had just triggered. She'd dealt with crises before. Playground accidents, sick children, parents falling apart during conferences. She could compartmentalize her feelings and handle what needed handling. "You," she pointed to the man in military fatigues. "What's your name?" "Tommy Rodriguez. Army medic, ma'am. Elena's my sister." "Tommy, get the space heaters from my basement. David, I have medical supplies in my bathroom cabinet. Harold had heart problems. Rev—" She looked at the man in the clerical collar who'd been standing quietly by her Christmas tree. "Michael Brown," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "And I should tell you up front, ma'am, I'm not actually ordained. I've been wearing this collar for 3 months, pretending to be something I'm not because it gets me meals and shelter, and right now I feel like the biggest fraud who ever lived." Under different circumstances, Margaret might have been scandalized. Tonight, with a child possibly dying and a baby being born in her living room, his honesty felt like a gift. "Well, fake reverend or not, you can help Mrs." She looked at the elderly black woman who was efficiently sorting through Margaret's linen closet. "Ruth Jackson, honey. And don't you worry about me. I raised 6 children and helped deliver 3 grandbabies. This girl's going to need more than prayers and good intentions." Margaret nodded, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years, the strange comfort of being part of a team. "Ruth, work with Elena. David, check Grace's pulse and breathing every 5 minutes. Tommy, after you get those heaters, help me move furniture. We're going to need space." As her unexpected guests sprang into action, Margaret found herself standing alone with Sarah, this ghost of her daughter's youth who was looking at her with a mixture of hope and terror that Margaret recognized all too well. 20 years, Sarah said quietly. "Mom never told me why you two stopped talking. She just said you didn't approve of the choices she made." Margaret's chest tightened. She was 19 and pregnant and unmarried, and I was a fool, a proud, stubborn fool who cared more about what the neighbors would think than about my own daughter's happiness. The words felt like gravel in her throat. I threw her out, Sarah. I told her not to come back until she could face this family with dignity, and she never did. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She waited for you to call. For years she waited. She named me Sarah Margaret, you know. After you. Even after everything, she still loved you. The admission hit Margaret like a physical blow. She'd convinced herself that Amanda had moved on, had forgotten, had built a life that didn't include regret or forgiveness. To learn that her daughter had carried Margaret's name forward, had passed it on to this beautiful girl, felt like a redemption she didn't deserve. Is she? Margaret couldn't finish the question. Cancer, Sarah whispered. Stage 4. The doctors say she has maybe weeks. She's been asking for you, especially since the pain medication makes her confused. She thinks I'm her little sister sometimes, thinks you're still fighting about her prom dress or her college choices. But other times, she's completely lucid, and she talks about this house, about Christmas mornings and Easter egg hunts and how you used to read to her every night. Margaret sank into her hallway chair, the weight of 20 lost years crushing down on her shoulders. All those Christmases she'd set the table for 12, hoping against hope that Amanda would walk through that door. All those nights she'd lain awake rehearsing apologies she was too proud to deliver. All that time wasted on righteousness and fear while her daughter was growing up, falling in love, having children, getting sick, possibly dying. She sent you here, Margaret said, understanding beginning to dawn. In a blizzard, to a stranger's house. She said you'd help me, Sarah replied simply. She said that underneath all that pride, you had the biggest heart of anyone she'd ever known. The next 3 hours transformed Margaret's house into something she'd never experienced, a place where strangers became family through crisis and necessity. Grace's color had improved under the space heaters and warm blankets, but her breathing remained shallow and David's face grew more worried with each pulse check. Elena's contractions were coming every 10 minutes now, and Ruth had taken charge of preparing for a possible home delivery with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Tommy had proved invaluable, his military training evident in how he organized supplies and maintained calm under pressure. He'd found candles when the power flickered, located Margaret's first aid kit, and somehow managed to make coffee on her old gas stove when the electric one failed. Even Michael, despite his confession about being a fake minister, had found his purpose in providing emotional support, sitting with Grace and telling her gentle stories about Christmas angels, while David monitored her vitals. Margaret found herself moving through her house with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Teaching had prepared her for chaos, for thinking quickly when children were in crisis. But this felt different. This felt like the family dinners she'd once dreamed of, where everyone had a role and everyone mattered. It was nearly 10 o'clock when the real earthquake hit. The knock on the door came sharp and official, cutting through the relative calm they'd established. Tommy immediately tensed, his hand moving instinctively to his waist where Margaret suspected he usually carried a weapon. "We expecting someone?" he asked quietly. Margaret shook her head, but something about the authoritative rhythm of the knocking made her stomach clench. She opened the door to find a tall, thin man in an expensive overcoat, briefcase in hand, snow melting on his shoulders. "Mrs. Margaret Whitmore?" His voice carried the precise diction of someone who spent his days in courtrooms. "I'm James Morrison, attorney with Morrison, Blake Associates. I apologize for the hour, but I've been trying to reach you all day regarding your late husband's estate." Margaret's blood turned to ice. Harold's estate was settled 5 years ago. Everything came to me. Morrison's expression was unreadable as he stepped into the warmth of her hallway, his eyes quickly taking in the scene. The makeshift medical station in her living room, the pregnant woman breathing through contractions on her sofa, the collection of strangers who'd turned her house into a refugee camp. "I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate, Mrs. Whitmore. There was a sealed codicil to your husband's will that was only to be opened under specific circumstances." He set his briefcase down and extracted a thick envelope. "Those circumstances have now been met." Margaret's hands shook as she accepted the envelope. Around her, the house had gone quiet. Even Elena had stopped her rhythmic breathing to listen. Sarah moved closer, as if sensing that whatever was in that envelope would affect them all. The letter was in Harold's familiar handwriting, dated just 3 months before his death. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means James has found you on Christmas Eve. And it means the people I've been helping have finally come to our door. I know this will be a shock, my love, but I need you to understand that everything I'm about to tell you comes from a place of desperate love for you and desperate hope for our family's healing. For the past 20 years, I have maintained a secret financial life. Not to deceive you, but to build a bridge back to the daughter we lost, and to ensure that when the time came, you would have the resources to open your heart again. I have saved and invested and sacrificed, hiding money in accounts you never knew existed, for one purpose, to give you the means to heal our family. The people in your house tonight are not strangers, Margaret. Elena Rodriguez has been Amanda's closest friend for 5 years. I've been paying for her nursing school because Amanda asked me to, because she knew Elena would end up at our door eventually. David Chen is the cardiologist who treated my heart condition, the one I never told you about because I didn't want you to worry. His daughter Grace is my biological child from a relationship I had before we met, a child I've been supporting secretly because her mother died 3 years ago. Sarah Thompson is our granddaughter, Margaret, Amanda's firstborn, the child she was carrying when we lost her. Tommy Rodriguez is Elena's brother, a veteran I've been helping through a PTSD support group. Ruth Jackson took Amanda in when she had nowhere else to go 20 years ago, and I've been grateful to her ever since. And Michael Brown? Well, Michael is just a broken man I hired to watch over you from a distance, because I was terrified of leaving you alone. Margaret's legs gave out. She sank onto the hallway stairs, the letter fluttering from her nerveless fingers. Sarah caught it before it hit the floor, her eyes scanning the words that were rewriting everything they thought they knew about the evening. "Keep reading, Grandma," Sarah whispered. And the word Grandma hit Margaret like a physical blow. David had gone completely still, his face pale. "Grace is Harold's daughter?" Elena was crying now, her contractions forgotten in the face of this revelation. "He paid for everything. My education, my apartment, even my prenatal care. He said it was from an anonymous benefactor, but I always wondered." Ruth was nodding slowly, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "That man visited Amanda every month for 15 years. Brought money, brought pictures of you, Margaret. She kept every single one. He never stopped hoping you'd reconcile." Margaret forced herself to pick up the letter again, her vision blurring with tears. "The money I've saved, $2.3 million, is being held in trust. It can only be released under one condition, that you open your heart and your home to these people I've been helping, that you allow them to become the family we lost when we lost Amanda. Elena is carrying Amanda's grandchild, Margaret, our great-grandchild. Sarah is the granddaughter you never got to know. Grace is my daughter who needs medical care we can afford to provide. Tommy is the son I never had. Ruth is the mother Amanda found when she couldn't come home to you. And Michael just needs to believe in something again. I'm dying, my love. The cancer is spreading faster than we can fight it, and I don't have long. But I couldn't leave you alone, and I couldn't die knowing our family would end with us. These people are my gift to you, not strangers, but the family we were always meant to have. The choice is yours, Margaret. You can send them away and live alone with your pride. Or you can open your arms and discover that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's choice, sometimes it's love, sometimes it's just people who show up when the storm hits and refuse to leave you in the cold. All my love, always and forever. Harold P.S. Check the basement behind my workbench. You'll find everything Grace needs for her surgery. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret looked around at the faces surrounding her, Elena's tear-streaked cheeks, David's stunned expression, Grace's innocent confusion, Tommy's protective stance, Ruth's knowing smile, Michael's guilty face, and Sarah's desperate hope. Surgery? Margaret's voice came out as a croak. David's professional composure cracked. Grace has a congenital heart defect. She needs a procedure that costs more than I'll ever be able to afford. I've been putting it off, hoping for a miracle, but... He looked down at the little girl who was his daughter, and Harold's daughter, and somehow, impossibly, Margaret's step-granddaughter. She doesn't have much time. Elena doubled over suddenly, gripping the arm of the sofa. "Oh, God," she gasped. "This baby is coming now." Ruth sprang into action. "Tommy, get towels and hot water. David, I need you to help with the delivery. Margaret." She looked at the older woman with gentle understanding. "Honey, you need to decide right now what kind of family you want to be." Margaret looked around her house. At the table set for 12 that was finally going to be used, at the strangers who weren't strangers, at the granddaughter she'd never known existed, at the great-grandchild about to be born in her living room. Harold had orchestrated all of this from beyond the grave, weaving together the lives of broken people and placing them in her hands like a gift wrapped in 20 years of regret and hope. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, Margaret Whitmore was no longer alone. The basement had become a makeshift operating theater by midnight. Harold's workshop, which Margaret had avoided for 5 years because it still smelled like his aftershave and sawdust dreams, now hummed with urgent activity. Behind his workbench, exactly where his letter had promised, they'd found a medical cache that defied explanation. A portable cardiac monitoring system, surgical instruments still in sterile packaging, medications with Grace's name on the labels, and detailed surgical notes in Harold's meticulous handwriting. David worked with the focused intensity of a man trying to save his daughter's life while processing the revelation that she was also Harold's child. His hands, steady despite everything, prepared the sterile field, while Grace lay unconscious under anesthesia that Harold had somehow procured months before his death. The little girl's pale face looked peaceful, unaware that her survival depended on surgery performed in a basement by a father who'd lost his medical license and equipment provided by a dead man's love. Upstairs, Elena's labor had progressed rapidly. Ruth commanded the living room like a general, her 68 years of experience evident in every calm instruction she gave. "Push now, honey," she encouraged, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "That's right, just like that. Tommy, bring more towels. Sarah, hold her hand and don't let go." Margaret found herself caught between 2 miracles happening simultaneously in her house. Downstairs, David fought to repair Grace's heart with tools and knowledge that Harold had somehow provided. Upstairs, Elena brought new life into the world with the help of strangers who'd become family in the span of hours. Margaret ran between floors carrying supplies, offering comfort, watching her carefully ordered world transform into something messy and beautiful and completely beyond her control. "How did he know?" she whispered to Michael, who was monitoring Grace's vitals according to David's instructions. "How did Harold know all this would happen tonight?" Michael's face was grave as he checked the monitors. Maybe he didn't know when, just that it would happen eventually. 20 years is a long time to plan for redemption. At 12:47 a.m. on Christmas morning, Elena's daughter entered the world with a cry that echoed through the house like a bell announcing hope. Ruth caught the baby expertly, clearing her airway and placing her on Elena's chest, while tears streamed down everyone's faces. The tiny girl was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair, and lungs that declared her arrival with impressive volume. "She's beautiful," Sarah sobbed, still holding Elena's hand. "What are you going to name her?" Elena looked around the room at the faces surrounding her. Ruth's weathered wisdom, Sarah's young hope, Tommy's protective pride, Margaret's stunned joy, and whispered, "Hope. Her name is Hope Margaret Rodriguez." Margaret felt her heart crack open completely. This child, born in her living room on Christmas morning, would carry her name into the future. Harold's great-grandchild, Amanda's grandchild, Elena's daughter, all the love that had been broken and scattered was coming together in this tiny, perfect person. But their celebration was interrupted by Tommy's urgent call from the basement. "David needs help down here. Grace's heartbeat is irregular." Margaret followed Tommy downstairs, her legs shaking with exhaustion and fear. David's face was pale with concentration as he worked over Grace's small form. "The procedure went well, but she's having some post-operative complications. Her heart rhythm is unstable." "What do you need?" Margaret asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Prayer," David said simply. "I've done everything medically possible. The rest is up to her." Margaret looked down at Grace's peaceful face. This child who was somehow her step-granddaughter, Harold's biological daughter, and a little girl who deserved to see Christmas morning. Without hesitation, she took Grace's small hand in hers. "Grace, sweetheart," she whispered, "you have so much to live for. Your daddy loves you so much, and you have a new baby sister upstairs who can't wait to meet you. And you have a grandmother, me, who just found out you exist and already loves you more than words can say." Sarah appeared at Margaret's elbow, her young face serious. "Can I try something? Mom used to sing to me when I was scared." Margaret nodded, and Sarah began to hum a lullaby that Margaret recognized, the same one she used to sing to Amanda 30 years ago. The melody filled the basement, soft and sweet and full of love that transcended blood and time and all the mistakes that had led them to this moment. Grace's heart monitor began to stabilize. The irregular rhythm smoothed into a strong, steady beat that brought tears to David's eyes. "That's my girl," he whispered, kissing Grace's forehead. "That's my brave, strong girl." Upstairs, they could hear Hope crying, healthy, robust cries that spoke of life and strength and endless possibility. The storm outside was beginning to weaken, though snow still fell steadily past the windows. Inside Margaret's house, 7 strangers had become a family bound by crisis and choice and Harold's posthumous orchestration of love. Margaret climbed the stairs slowly, her body exhausted, but her heart fuller than it had been in 20 years. In her living room, Elena nursed baby Hope, while Ruth cleaned up the evidence of the evening's medical emergencies. Tommy sat beside them, his tough exterior completely melted as he stared at his new niece with wonder. Michael had found Margaret's Bible and was reading Christmas verses quietly by the window, his earlier confession about being a false minister, forgotten in the face of real faith found through service. "She's going to be okay," Margaret announced, and the relief in the room was palpable. "Grace is stable. David says she'll need monitoring, but the surgery was successful." Elena looked up from her nursing daughter, tears of gratitude shining in her eyes. "I don't understand any of this. How Harold knew we'd all end up here. how he prepared for everything, how he managed to save Grace's life from beyond the grave. "Love finds a way," Ruth said simply, settling into Margaret's favorite armchair with the ease of someone who'd found her place. That man spent 20 years building bridges back to the family he lost. Tonight, we all walked across those bridges and found each other. Margaret looked around her living room, at Elena with baby Hope, at Sarah curled up on the sofa looking more peaceful than she had all evening, at Tommy standing guard by the window, at Michael finding faith in her husband's Bible, at Ruth settling in like she belonged here. Downstairs, David was watching over Grace with the devotion of a father who'd been given back his child's life. Her table was still set for 12 in the dining room, and for the first time in 47 years, she had enough people to fill every chair. But even as joy flooded through her, Margaret knew this was just the beginning. Elena would need support as a new mother. Grace would require ongoing medical care. Sarah needed stability and love and someone to help her navigate her mother's illness. Tommy deserved a chance to heal from whatever had broken him. Ruth needed a safe place to land. Michael needed to find his real purpose. And all of them, including Margaret herself, needed to learn how to be a family. Harold's money could solve the practical problems, but love, that would take time and patience and forgiveness and countless small choices to keep showing up for each other. Margaret touched the letter in her pocket, Harold's final gift to her, and whispered, "Thank you, my love. You brought them home." The fragile peace of Christmas morning shattered at 7 a.m. when Margaret collapsed in her kitchen while making coffee for her unexpected family. Sarah found her grandmother unconscious on the linoleum floor, coffee grounds scattered around her like dark snow, her face gray and her breathing shallow. "Help!" Sarah's scream brought everyone running. David, still exhausted from Grace's surgery, dropped to his knees beside Margaret and began checking her vitals while Elena, despite having given birth hours earlier, struggled to her feet with baby Hope clutched to her chest. "Her pulse is erratic," David said, his voice tight with professional concern. "Tommy, call 911. Ruth, get my medical bag from downstairs." "Phone lines are still down from the storm," Tommy reported after trying Margaret's landline. "Cell towers, too, were completely cut off." The weight of their isolation hit everyone simultaneously. They were trapped in a house with a woman who might be dying, a newborn who needed proper medical attention, and Grace, who was still recovering from heart surgery in the basement. The roads were impassable, communication was impossible, and their makeshift family was fracturing under the pressure of too many medical crises happening at once. Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind lost in a fog that made the present feel like a distant dream. She could hear voices around her, Sarah crying, Elena trying to calm baby Hope, David giving medical instructions, but they seemed to come from very far away. Fragments of memory mixed with current reality. Harold making Christmas morning coffee 30 years ago. Amanda opening presents as a child, faces she didn't recognize, speaking words she couldn't quite understand. "She's having some kind of neurological episode," David told the group quietly. "Could be a stroke, could be related to her Alzheimer's, or it could be the stress of everything that's happened. Without proper diagnostic equipment, I can't tell." Elena, pale from blood loss and exhaustion, sat heavily in a kitchen chair while Hope fussed in her arms. "I should be helping her. I'm a nurse, but I can barely stand up." Ruth, moving with the efficiency of someone who dealt with medical emergencies her entire life, took charge of the practical matters. "We need to keep her warm and monitor her breathing. Sarah, bring pillows and blankets. Tommy, check on Grace. Make sure this commotion hasn't affected her recovery. Michael, see if you can find any medical information in Margaret's papers, prescriptions, doctor's notes, anything that might help David understand what we're dealing with." As the morning wore on, Margaret's condition seemed to stabilize, but she remained largely unresponsive. her eyes open but unfocused, her words, when they came, disjointed and confused. She called for Harold repeatedly, asked for Amanda as if expecting her 19-year-old daughter to walk through the door, and sometimes stared at Sarah with genuine terror, as if looking at a stranger who'd invaded her home. "She doesn't remember us," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her young face. "She doesn't remember anything that happened last night." The cruel irony wasn't lost on any of them. Just when Margaret had found her family again, her mind was stealing away the memory of their reunion. Harold's careful planning, the miracle of their Christmas Eve gathering, the baby born in her living room, Grace's successful surgery, all of it might be lost in the fog of her failing memory. Elena struggled to nurse hope while fighting her own physical weakness. The baby seemed to sense the tension in the house, crying more frequently and refusing to settle. Without proper medical supplies or a hospital environment, Elena's recovery was complicated by stress and the primitive conditions of their situation. Downstairs, Grace remained stable but weak, asking for her father in a small voice that broke everyone's heart. David was torn between caring for his daughter and trying to help Margaret, his medical training pulled in multiple directions by the needs of his makeshift family. "This is falling apart," Tommy said quietly to Ruth, as they stood by the kitchen window watching snow continue to fall. "We can't take care of all of them properly. Margaret needs a hospital, Elena needs proper postpartum care, Grace needs pediatric cardiac monitoring, and we're just a bunch of people trapped in a house pretending we know what we're doing." Ruth's response was gentle but firm. "Honey, families don't fall apart when things get hard. That's when they prove what they're really made of. Harold didn't bring us together so we could run at the first sign of trouble." But even Ruth's wisdom couldn't hide the stark reality of their situation. Margaret's condition was deteriorating, and without professional medical intervention, they might lose the woman whose home had become their sanctuary. The money Harold had left meant nothing if they couldn't keep Margaret alive to enjoy the family he'd given her. As Christmas Day wore on, the weight of responsibility and the fear of loss pressed down on all of them like the storm clouds gathering outside. At 2 o'clock on Christmas afternoon, while Margaret drifted in and out of confused consciousness and the rest of the household struggled to maintain hope, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. She was looking through Margaret's bedroom dresser for clean nightgowns when her fingers found a hidden compartment behind the bottom drawer, a space that contained dozens of letters tied with faded ribbon and a small wooden box that smelled of Harold's cologne. The letters were addressed to Margaret in Amanda's handwriting, postmarked over the past 20 years, but never opened. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day, Amanda had written to her mother faithfully, and Margaret had saved every letter without reading a single one. Sarah's hands trembled as she untied the ribbon and opened the most recent envelope, dated just 3 months ago. "Dear Mom, I know you'll probably never read this, but I have to keep trying. The doctors say I don't have much time left, and there are things I need you to know before I go. I forgave you a long time ago for what happened when I was 19. I understand now that you were scared and trying to protect our family's reputation in the only way you knew how. But I need you to know that sending me away was the best thing that could have happened to me. Ruth Jackson took me in when I had nowhere else to go, and she became the mother I needed while I was learning to become a mother myself. Sarah is everything good and strong and beautiful in this world, and she carries your name because I never stopped loving you, never stopped hoping that someday you'd want to know your granddaughter. Dad has been visiting me all these years. I hope you're not angry with him for keeping our secret, but he was trying to heal what we broke. He's helped me through nursing school, through single motherhood, through every crisis and celebration. But more than that, He's kept me connected to you by bringing me stories about your life, your health, your loneliness that breaks his heart every day. I'm writing this because I'm scared I'm going to die without ever seeing you again, without ever telling you that I understand why you did what you did and that I love you anyway. Sarah doesn't know about you yet, but if something happens to me, she's going to need her grandmother. She's strong like you, stubborn like you, and she has your heart, even though she's never met you. If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, and it means you've finally opened one of my letters. Please don't blame yourself for the years we lost. Please just love my daughter the way I know you're capable of loving. She's going to need that love so much. Your daughter, always, Amanda. Sarah read through tears that blurred the words, then raced downstairs to find Ruth, who was sitting beside Margaret's makeshift sick bed, holding her hand and speaking softly about the baby sleeping upstairs. "Ruth," Sarah whispered urgently, "I need to tell you something about my mother." Ruth looked up with knowing eyes. "She's dying, isn't she? That's why you're really here." Sarah nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Ruth squeezed Margaret's hand gently and whispered, "Margaret, honey, you need to wake up. Your daughter needs you, and time is running out." As if summoned by Ruth's words, Margaret's eyes fluttered open with more awareness than they'd shown all day. "Amanda?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Is Amanda here?" "No, sweetheart," Ruth said gently. "But Sarah is here, your granddaughter Sarah, and she has something important to tell you." Sarah knelt beside the couch and took Margaret's other hand. "Grandma, I need you to listen to me. Mom is in the hospital in Chicago. She has cancer and she's been asking for you. She sent me here because she wanted me to find you before—" Sarah's voice broke. "Before it's too late." Margaret's confusion seemed to clear like fog lifting from a lake. "Cancer? My baby has cancer?" "Stage 4, Sarah whispered. "She's been fighting it for 2 years, but the doctors say she doesn't have long. She's been writing you letters, Grandma. 20 years of letters that you never opened. She forgave you years ago. She never stopped loving you." Margaret struggled to sit up, her face transforming with desperate urgency. "I have to go to her. I have to see her." "The roads are still impassable," David said gently from across the room. "The storm knocked down power lines and trees. We're completely cut off until the plows can get through." Margaret's face crumpled with despair. 20 years I wasted being proud and stubborn, and now when she needs me most, I can't get to her." It was then that Michael, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, spoke up with unexpected authority. "Actually, you can. I know someone who owes me a favor, a helicopter pilot who does medical evacuations. If I can get word to him somehow." Tommy looked up sharply. "You know a medevac pilot?" Michael's face reddened. "Before I started pretending to be a minister, I was an actor, a terrible actor, but I had a few friends in strange places. Jake Morrison flies for Detroit General. He's pulled people out of worse situations than this." Elena, who had been listening while nursing Hope, suddenly straightened. "Jake Morrison? He's my supervisor's brother-in-law. If we could somehow get a message to the hospital." Margaret gripped Sarah's hand with surprising strength. "The radio. Harold had a ham radio in the basement for emergencies." "I never learned to use it, but maybe—" Tommy was already heading for the stairs. "I know ham radio, military training. If it still works, I can reach someone." The next hour was a frenzy of activity. Tommy worked frantically with Harold's radio equipment while David monitored Margaret's vital signs, and Elena coordinated information about the hospital and Jake Morrison's flight schedule. Ruth kept Grace comfortable and calm while Michael paced the house like a man who'd finally found his purpose. At 4:30 p.m., Tommy's voice crackled through the radio static. Detroit General, this is emergency transmission from Maple Street. We need immediate medical evacuation for patient transport to see dying family member. Do you copy? The response came through clearly. We copy Maple Street. Stand by for medevac coordination. Within 2 hours, they could hear the helicopter circling overhead, its searchlight cutting through the late afternoon snow. Jake Morrison landed in Margaret's backyard with the skill of someone who'd done impossible rescues before, and his first words as he entered the house were, "Elena Rodriguez, what the hell are you doing having a baby in a snowstorm?" Margaret, wrapped in blankets and supported by Sarah and Ruth, managed a weak smile. "Are you going to get me to my daughter?" Jake grinned. "Ma'am, I once pulled a heart attack victim off a Lake Superior ice floe in a blizzard. Getting you to Chicago is going to be a pleasure cruise." As they prepared for the flight, Margaret looked around at the faces that had become her family in less than 24 hours. Elena holding baby Hope, David carrying Grace upstairs from her basement recovery room, Tommy shutting down the radio equipment, Ruth gathering Margaret's medications, Michael finding his faith through service, and Sarah, beautiful Sarah with Amanda's eyes and Harold's gentle heart. "What about all of you?" Margaret asked. "I can't just leave you here." Ruth smiled and patted Margaret's hand. "Honey, we're not going anywhere. This is home now. When you come back with Amanda, you're going to have a house full of family waiting for you." Margaret looked at Sarah, her heart breaking with love and urgency. "Come with me. She needs to see you." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I want to be there when you see her again." As the helicopter lifted off into the stormy Chicago sky, Margaret held her granddaughter's hand and prayed they wouldn't be too late. Below them, Harold's house glowed with warm light, filled with the family he'd spent 5 years orchestrating, and Margaret had found just in time. 20 years of separation were about to end, if love and modern medicine and Christmas miracles could get them to Amanda's bedside before her final breath. The helicopter touched down on the roof of Northwestern Memorial Hospital at 7:23 p.m. on Christmas Day, and Margaret Whitmore's legs nearly gave out as she stepped onto the landing pad. 20 years of separation were about to end in the most devastating way possible, not with celebration or reconciliation, but with goodbye. Sarah gripped her grandmother's arm tightly as hospital staff rushed to meet them, their faces grave with the knowledge that they were facilitating what might be a final farewell. Dr. Patricia Chen, the oncologist who'd been treating Amanda, met them at the elevator with the gentle demeanor of someone who'd delivered countless pieces of heartbreaking news. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so glad you made it. Amanda has been asking for you constantly since yesterday. Her condition has deteriorated rapidly over the past 48 hours, but she's been holding on. I think she was waiting for you." Margaret's hands shook as the elevator climbed to the oncology ward. Beside her, Sarah was crying silently, her young face etched with grief that no 16-year-old should have to bear. The antiseptic smell of the hospital brought back memories of Harold's final days, of sitting beside his bed holding his hand while machines beeped and nurses spoke in hushed tones about comfort and time and letting go. "What should I say to her?" Margaret whispered to Dr. Chen. 20 years of silence, and I don't know what words could possibly be enough. "Just tell her you love her," Dr. Chen replied gently. "That's all she's been waiting to hear." Room 412 was dimly lit, filled with the soft sounds of medical equipment and the harsh rhythm of labored breathing. Amanda Thompson lay propped up in the hospital bed, her once beautiful face gaunt from illness and pain medication, her dark hair gone from chemotherapy, her body diminished to almost nothing. But when she saw Margaret standing in the doorway, her eyes, those same bright eyes that had sparkled with mischief and dreams 30 years ago, lit up with pure joy. "Mom?" Amanda's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried 20 years of hope and forgiveness. "You came." You actually came." Margaret crossed the room on unsteady legs and sank into the chair beside Amanda's bed. She reached out with trembling fingers to touch her daughter's face, this woman she'd thrown away in anger and pride, this child she'd lost to her own stubbornness. "I'm so sorry," Margaret sobbed, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. "I'm so sorry, Amanda. I was wrong about everything. I was scared and stupid and proud, and I lost you, and I've regretted it every single day for 20 years. Amanda smiled weakly and reached up to touch Margaret's face in return. "I forgave you a long time ago, Mom. I understood why you did what you did. I just never stopped hoping you'd forgive yourself." Sarah stepped forward then, her presence reminding both women that this reunion was about more than just healing old wounds. It was about connecting the past to the future, about ensuring that love would continue even after death claimed its due. "Mom," Sarah said softly, "I found her. I found Grandma, just like you asked me to." Amanda's eyes moved to her daughter, and Margaret saw in that look all the love and pride and fierce protection that she herself had once felt for Amanda. "You're so beautiful, sweetheart, and so brave, taking care of me all this time, and now taking care of Grandma, too." "She's not taking care of me," Margaret said firmly, taking Sarah's hand and pulling her closer. "We're taking care of each other. We're family." The next few hours passed in a blur of words that had been waiting 20 years to be spoken. Amanda told Margaret about her life, about nursing school and the apartment Ruth had helped her find, about Sarah's childhood and the struggles of single motherhood, about the cancer diagnosis that had forced her to confront her own mortality. Margaret shared her loneliness, her regret, her grief over Harold's death, and her amazement at discovering the family he'd orchestrated for her. "He visited you?" Margaret said, not quite a question. "Every month for 15 years, Amanda confirmed. "He brought pictures of you, told me about your garden and your book club and how you still set the table for 12 every Christmas. He never stopped believing we'd find our way back to each other." "I set that table for you," Margaret whispered, "every year, hoping you'd walk through the door." "I know," Amanda smiled through her tears. "Dad told me. He said you never gave up hope even when you told yourself you had." As the night wore on, Amanda grew weaker, but her spirit seemed stronger than it had in months. She asked detailed questions about Elena and baby Hope, about Grace's surgery and David's skill, about Tommy's protective instincts and Ruth's wisdom, and Michael's journey from deception to faith. She laughed when Margaret described finding 7 strangers on her porch during the blizzard, and cried when she learned that Sarah had inherited Margaret's stubborn determination. "They're your family now," Amanda said, as dawn light began to filter through the hospital windows. "All of them. Harold knew what he was doing when he brought them to you." "You're my family," Margaret insisted. "You and Sarah and all the years we have left together." Amanda's expression grew gentle but firm. "Mom, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to get better. The doctors have done everything they can, and my body is tired of fighting. But I'm not afraid anymore, because I know Sarah has you now, and you have her, and neither of you will ever be alone again." Margaret wanted to argue, to insist that medical miracles happened, that love could overcome anything, that surely God wouldn't reunite them only to tear them apart again. But one look at her daughter's peaceful face told her that Amanda had already made her peace with dying, and that the real miracle wasn't going to be a cure. It was going to be the time they had left to love each other. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway just after sunrise, her expression somber. "Amanda, your vital signs are declining. Is there anything else you need to say or do?" Amanda looked at Margaret with eyes that held no fear, only love. "I need you to promise me something, Mom. Promise me you'll be happy. Promise me you'll let that house fill up with laughter and chaos and all the noise that comes with a real family. Promise me you won't waste another day on regret." "I promise," Margaret whispered, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "And Sarah," Amanda turned to her daughter, "promise me you'll let Grandma spoil you rotten. Promise me you'll tell your children about the grandmother who lost her daughter and found her again just in time to say goodbye." Sarah couldn't speak through her tears, but she nodded fiercely, clutching both her mother's and grandmother's hands. Amanda closed her eyes then, her breathing growing more labored but her face serene. "Tell me about Christmas morning," she whispered. "Tell me about baby Hope and Grace's recovery and everyone gathered around the table." Margaret began to speak, her voice soft and steady, painting a picture of the family Amanda would never meet, but had helped create through her own sacrifice and forgiveness. She described Elena's joy at becoming a mother, David's relief at Grace's successful surgery, Ruth's quiet wisdom, Tommy's protective strength, Michael's newfound faith, and Sarah's courage in bringing them all together. As Margaret spoke, Amanda's breathing slowed and softened until it was barely perceptible. At 8:47 a.m. on December 26th, surrounded by love and forgiveness and the promise of family continuing, Amanda Thompson took her final breath with a smile on her lips. Margaret held her daughter's still warm hand and felt something break open in her chest. Not her heart, which had already been shattered and healed, but something deeper. The prison of pride and regret that had held her captive for 20 years finally crumbled completely, leaving her free to love without reservation, to grieve without shame, and to live without fear. Sarah sobbed against her grandmother's shoulder, and Margaret held her tight, this beautiful girl who was now hers to love and protect and guide through the years ahead. They had each other now, and they had the family waiting for them back in Detroit, and they had Harold's legacy of love that would continue long after his earthly orchestration had ended. Amanda was gone, but she had left them with the greatest gift possible, each other, and the knowledge that love really could overcome anything, even 20 years of silence, even death itself. 1 year later, Margaret Whitmore stood in her kitchen on Christmas Eve morning, watching controlled chaos unfold around her with a heart so full it threatened to overflow. The Victorian house that had once echoed with silence now hummed with the beautiful noise of family, real family, chosen family, the kind of family that forms not from blood alone but from love and commitment and the daily choice to show up for each other. Elena was at the stove making her grandmother's tamales recipe. Baby Hope balanced on her hip while she stirred masa with practiced efficiency. At 13 months old, Hope was walking now, toddling between the adults with the fearless confidence of a child who'd never known anything but love and security. Her first word had been abuela, directed at Margaret with a gummy grin that melted every heart in the house. Grace, now 9 and fully recovered from her heart surgery, sat at the kitchen table carefully decorating sugar cookies with Sarah, who at 17 had blossomed into a poised young woman with Margaret's determination and Amanda's gentle heart. Sarah was a senior in high school now, president of the student council and bound for nursing school in the fall with a full scholarship funded by Harold's Foundation. "Grandma Maggie," Grace called out, using the name she'd given Margaret to distinguish her from Ruth, whom she called Grandma Ruth. "Can you help me with this angel's wings? I want them to be perfect." Margaret smiled and moved to help Grace, marveling as she always did at the easy way the children had incorporated her into their lives. Grace had no memory of life before the Victorian house, no recollection of the years when David struggled to afford her medical care. To her, Margaret had always been Grandma Maggie, the woman who made the best pancakes in Detroit and kept a cookie jar perpetually full and told stories about the old days that made everyone laugh. David emerged from the basement where he'd been setting up his medical practice's new telemedicine equipment. After regaining his license, he'd chosen to operate a family practice from the converted basement, providing affordable health care to the neighborhood while keeping Grace close by. The basement that had once housed Harold's workshop and Grace's emergency surgery now served as a full medical clinic, complete with examination rooms and a small pharmacy. "The Peterson family is here for their appointment," he announced, wiping his hands on a towel. "Mrs. Peterson's diabetes is much better controlled, and little Jimmy's asthma hasn't flared up once since we adjusted his medication." Margaret nodded with satisfaction. The house had become more than a home. It was a community center, a safe haven, a place where healing happened on multiple levels. Tommy's security consulting business operated from the converted garage, helping other veterans find purpose and stability. Ruth ran a support group for senior citizens in the living room every Tuesday, teaching them how to navigate loneliness and grief. Michael, now licensed as a family counselor, used the sunroom for sessions with couples and families working through their own reconciliations. Elena's nursing practice had grown into a small clinic that specialized in maternal and infant care, serving immigrant families who often couldn't afford traditional health care. She and Tommy had married in the backyard 6 months ago, with Grace as the flower girl and Hope as the admittedly uncooperative ring-bearer. Their second child was due in the spring, and Elena glowed with the confidence of a woman who knew she was exactly where she belonged. The front door opened with the familiar sound that still made Margaret's heart skip, the sound of family coming home. Amanda's husband, Marcus, entered first, shaking snow from his coat and calling out greetings in the warm voice that had won over everyone in the house within weeks of his first visit. Behind him came their twin boys, Amanda's stepchildren whom she'd raised since they were toddlers, now college juniors who considered Margaret their honorary grandmother. "Grandma Whitmore!" the twins chorused, enveloping Margaret in the kind of enthusiastic hug that reminded her daily how blessed she was to have lived long enough to see this day. Margaret still missed Amanda with an ache that would never fully heal, but the grief had transformed over the months from something sharp and devastating into something gentler, a bittersweet gratitude for the time they'd had and the love that continued through Sarah and the extended family Amanda had made possible. Amanda's room had been converted into a nursery for Elena and Tommy's growing family, but Margaret had kept Amanda's favorite quilt and the picture of her as a little girl on the nightstand, reminders that love transcends death and that some gifts keep giving long after the giver is gone. The afternoon brought more arrivals. Jake Morrison, the helicopter pilot who'd become an honorary family member, stopped by with his wife and daughters, Dr. Chen from the hospital came with her family, having formed a close friendship with Margaret during Amanda's final weeks. Even James Morrison, the lawyer who'd delivered Harold's letter that fateful Christmas Eve, had become a regular visitor, bringing his own grandchildren to play with Hope and Grace. As evening approached, and the house filled with the sounds of multiple conversations, children's laughter, and the clatter of dishes being prepared for the feast, Margaret found herself standing in the same spot where she'd stood a year ago, watching strangers become family. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, she was surrounded by love in all its messy, complicated, beautiful forms. Sarah appeared beside her, now taller than Margaret and radiant with the confidence of a young woman who knew she was loved unconditionally. "Thinking about Mom?" she asked gently. "Always," Margaret replied, slipping her arm around her granddaughter's waist. "But thinking about her makes me happy now, not sad. She gave me you, and you led me to all of them. She's part of every good thing that's happened since." Ruth emerged from the dining room where she'd been setting the table with the help of Grace and the twins. At 69, Ruth had found new purpose in managing the household's complex logistics, ensuring that everyone's needs were met and that the Victorian house ran like a well-oiled machine. She'd also become Margaret's closest friend, the sister she'd never had, someone who understood the weight of years and the preciousness of second chances. "Table's ready for 18, Ruth announced with pride. Harold's dream of filling those 12 chairs, and then some. Margaret looked around at the faces that had become her world. Elena nursing Hope while discussing patient care with David. Tommy showing the twins his latest security gadgets. Michael reading Christmas stories to Grace. Jake's daughters teaching Hope to clap her hands. Dr. Chen and her family admiring the decorations that Sarah and Grace had hung throughout the house. This was what Harold had envisioned when he'd spent 5 years orchestrating their Christmas Eve meeting. Not just the healing of old wounds, but the creation of something entirely new, a family that transcended traditional boundaries, that proved love was stronger than blood, that demonstrated how broken people could heal each other simply by choosing to stay, to care, to show up day after day with open hearts and willing hands. As they gathered around the expanded dining room table, the same table Margaret had set for 12 or 47 years, now extended with card tables and mismatched chairs to accommodate everyone, Margaret felt Harold's presence as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. He was there in every laugh, every shared story, every moment of connection that proved his faith in love's power to heal and restore and create new life from the ashes of old pain. The prayer that night was led by Michael, who'd found his calling not in false ministry but in genuine service to others. As 18 voices joined together in gratitude for food, family, and second chances, Margaret closed her eyes and whispered her own prayer of thanks. For Amanda's forgiveness, for Sarah's courage, for Harold's wisdom, and for the beautiful chaos of a life lived in service to love. When she opened her eyes, she saw Hope reaching across the table toward her with chubby fingers, and Margaret reached back, connecting past to future, lost to hope, solitude to family. The circle was complete, but it was also just beginning, a message for our community. If you're reading this story and feeling the weight of regret, estranged relationships, or the fear that it's too late to heal what's broken in your life, please know that Margaret's story could be your story. At 72, she discovered that love really can overcome decades of pride, that families can be rebuilt from the ashes of old mistakes, and that our greatest gifts often come disguised as our deepest challenges. The 7 strangers who knocked on her door weren't just characters in a story. They represent the people in your own life who are waiting for you to open your heart to say, "I'm sorry," to choose love over pride. Harold spent 5 years orchestrating a Christmas miracle, but the real miracle was Margaret's willingness to let go of the past and embrace an uncertain but love-filled future. Your own second chances are waiting. In that phone call you're afraid to make, that letter you're hesitant to send, that conversation you've been avoiding for years. This Christmas season, ask yourself, what doors in your life need to be opened? What tables need to be set? What love stories are waiting to be written if you just find the courage to begin? Join the conversation. Have you experienced a late-in-life reconciliation that changed everything? What's keeping you from reaching out to someone you miss? Share your story below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to take that first brave step toward healing.